meeting is now being recorded.
Okay, thanks again. This morning we have my colleague Lisbeth Gronlund from the Union of Concerned Scientists who's going to talk about U.S. plans for a new nuclear weapon. Lisbeth.
Yes, thank you. So a small but very select group of participants. So I'm going to talk about U.S. plans for new nuclear weapons. And when I say new, I don't mean, I'm actually talking about newly designed nuclear weapons, not, just new ones. So let me go on. So for many, many years, decades, the U.S. had a sort of ongoing series of weapon designs, and they were designed and produced and deployed and then dismantled, and there was this ongoing program, and we designed over 100 different warheads and bombs, and 70 of those were produced. And you name it, demolition munitions, missile defense systems. We had a nuclear-tipped missile defense system. And all of that came to a crashing halt when the U.S. Announced a moratorium on nuclear explosive testing. And at that point, the question was, what do we do? Okay, all of these design activities use nuclear testing, and I'll explain in what way they used it. But clearly, things were going to be different. So there are thousands of non-nuclear components in a weapon, and here is a B-61 bomb with its various pieces laid out. There's plastics, there's wires, there's all kinds of things. And all of those can be tested without exploding the weapon, of course. Then the rest of it is referred to as a nuclear explosive package, and it contains the primary with the plutonium pit, which is that yellow, no, it's not, it's the green, it's the brown circle at the top of the diagram, and then the green surrounding it with the little red arrows is the high explosive that compresses the plutonium, and then the little white arrows that are going down are the X-rays that then ignite the secondary. So that is the part that is not all these pieces that can be tested. So how do you determine the reliability of this? So as I said, the U.S. engaged in a lot of weapons development, and it conducted over 1,000 nuclear explosive tests. But that number of tests is not enough to provide any statistical measure of the reliability of these weapons. And in fact, very few had that purpose at all. So there were a few, what they call stockpile confidence, where you would actually take a weapon out of the field and bring it back and explode it. Very few. In fact, instead, all of these almost all of these 1,000 tests were proof tests. Basically, you think you had a design that worked, and this was just to verify that it did. So, so how do you judge the reliability if you can't do it via testing? Well, there's non-nuclear testing, there's surveillance, and there's understanding the physics of failure. And if you have a nuclear explosive package that has previously been tested via a proof test, the question is, how reliable is it as time goes on? So the assumption is that there are so few working parts, and there is actually so little that can go wrong, that if the primary releases a certain minimum energy, the secondary is basically guaranteed to detonate with the design yield within plus or minus 10%, which is the standard. And I was in a meeting once with some weapons designers, and I said, well, what is, the reliability of the nuclear explosive package? I really didn't expect this person to answer, but they said ONE. And of course, I assumed it was an acronym. I said, well, ONE, what does that stand for? And he says, ONE. And I said, what? And he said, one. I said, one? Like 100% one? And he said, yes. So that is the assumption that once you have something that has been proof tested, that you're going to do surveillance and so forth, but you are very confident in that, in the reliability of that warhead. And so now, after the U.S. stock testing, it established what it calls the Stockpile Stewardship Program. And this was because the assumption was that there were no more proof testing, no more new designs. And so instead, the U.S. was going to do life extension programs. It was going to refurbish the weapons that it intended to keep for the future. And so there have now been about 25 years of this program, and part of it has been a very substantial investment in superfast computers. And so the question is, can you replace these existing nuclear explosive packages with new design? So why would you want to do that? Okay, so in June 2013, there was a statement by this comes out of DOE, the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration. The U.S. will not develop new nuclear warheads or provide new military capabilities except to improve safety, security, and reliability. So let's look at that. Okay. Safety. So I just want to make it very clear that this is not about improving the safety against a nuclear explosion. Okay, so all of U.S. weapons are designed to be 1-point safe. And basically, the high explosive burns in a few microseconds. And so the idea, because it goes so fast, in order to compress the plutonium, you need to have pretty much simultaneous detonation of the high explosive, highly symmetrical. So if there were an accident of some sort or an attack, it would be, the assumption is that it would be at 1 point, and so it would not result in a large scale fission, but it could result in a small scale fission. And so the requirement is, if detonation is initiated at 1 point, the probability of a nuclear explosion must be no more than 1 in 10 to the 6th. That is true for all of the weapons we have, and the goal of improving safety is unrelated to that. Okay, when people talk about improving safety, they're talking about the reducing the risk of plutonium dispersal. Okay, so if the high explosive goes off and there's no nuclear explosion, you still get plutonium, spewed around, which is not good. And in fact, in the past, the U.S. accidentally dropped bombs on Spain, and there was a plutonium contamination. Same thing in Greenland. So clearly, you don't want that to happen. So let me back up. So this high explosive that is needed to compress the plutonium comes in 2 versions. The standard one, conventional high explosive, which was used initially on all of our weapons, and a newer, although by now it's been decades, insensitive high explosive, which, as the name implies, is less sensitive. Now, you can't just swap one for the other because you need more of the insensitive high explosive to give you the same kick as you get with the conventional. Okay. But if you do put insensitive high explosive, you do get these benefits. It makes handling safer for workers, potentially saving a little bit of money, all good things. So let's look at the insensitive high explosive issue. So we have several warheads that have insensitive high explosives. The newer one, the newer warhead on the ICBMs, the B-61 bomb, which has many variants, but the U.S. is currently consolidating it to one variant, and that is, the bomb that we have will be in the U.S. and Europe. The air-launched cruise missile. And so the ones that don't have insensitive high explosive are both weapons on the subs and the other weapon on the ICBM. Now, what's interesting about this, just a little aside, is that insensitive high explosive was developed in the 80s, and when the U.S. began production of the W-88, it was an option. And the Navy said, no, we don't want it because it'll make the warhead bigger, and we want to put as many warheads as we can on each missile. So, there are, the concern about plutonium dispersal safety has not been a driver, in the past. So what do you get for IHE? So if you look at the minimum explosive charge required to detonate the, conventional high explosive, it doesn't take much of TNT. The insensitive high explosive is considerably larger, greater than 4 ounces. But the U.S., a standard U.S. hand grenade is 8 ounces. And you could also use an anti-tank bazooka with a shaped charge. So those are security benefits, right? So on the one hand, if you drop it, clearly the insensitive high explosive is going to do the job, or almost clearly. If if it's a security issue and you are worried about somebody deliberately trying to detonate this thing, it doesn't get you far enough. Same thing for the minimum projectile velocity. So for the conventional high explosive, it will be set off by we're talking a bullet, at 45 meters a second, and that goes up to about 1,000. But if you get online, there are several combinations of rifles and bullets that give you greater than that speed, at a distance of up to 150 meters. So again, it's a real plus for safety, or it's a plus for safety, not so much security. The other thing is that, we'll talk about the next two things next, the bottom two. So then you have to consider not just what is on. Well, there are, in the same way that there are two kinds of explosives to detonate the warhead, there are two kinds of propellants that you can use on a missile: conventional and insensitive. And again, the distinction is pretty, well, in this case, I think it's more significant. So projectile detonation impossible for the insensitive propellant. Various, and you can see, right. So the missiles on our subs use the conventional propellant for the same reason. You need more to get you the same oomph, and the Navy said no. We want our missiles to go as far as they can. We want them to be as light as they can. We don't care about this. So for that reason, the benefits of putting insensitive high explosive on submarine warheads is less than doing so for ICBM warheads. So if you detonated the propellant, the missile propellant, it doesn't matter whether or not you have IAG, it goes. Whereas in contrast, the ICBMs use the insensitive propellant. And now it's true that IAG would provide some safety benefits during the warhead and transportation, the handling and transportation of the warheads. But the benefits are greater for the ICBMs than the S. Okay. What about reliability? That was the other thing that the goal was to increase reliability. Okay, so the reliability of a nuclear weapon has various components. One is what is the yield at which it detonates? It's got to be a design yield plus or minus 10%. And this goes back to the fact that they could not accurately measure the yield to within plus or minus 10%. But, so in other words, if it's 15%, it's not reliable. It doesn't pass the grade. At the target, right, this is the delivery system. It doesn't help you if it detonates at the right yield, but doesn't go to where it's supposed to go. Across the stockpile to target sequence of environments, which means that as the warhead goes from where it's launched to where it lands, there might be fratricide, there might be nuclear explosions from a nuclear-tipped missile defense system, and it has to be able to go through that environment. And then the last one is throughout the weapon's lifetime, assuming proper inputs. So all of our weapons use a tritium boost gas that injects neutrons into the pit, in order just to give it a kick. And the tritium has a very short half-life, and so you need to replace it on a periodic basis. And what they want to be sure of is that it's reliable just before you replace it. In terms of the first one, the probability of achieving the specification, and this goes back to the reliability ONE. So what you see here is the primary yield versus the total yield, and the total yield would, of course, include the secondary. And so if you get up to this plateau, you are guaranteed to have the total yield that it is designed for. So the entire question is, how close are you to that edge? Because if it doesn't give you enough, if the primary yield does not go off with enough power, it will not kick off the second. So this is the design challenge for weapons designers. This is really what it's about. And you don't really know where that cliff is, and you don't know how far away you are from it. And I'm assuming that all of this computing and various things have given people a better sense both of where the cliff is and how far away you are. But some of our weapons were designed with robust margins and some not so much. And some of the things that, so this was a cliff I showed you. It's really more like a mesa. There are various things that take you further away from the edge, the amount of chemical high explosives, the amount of tritium, obviously that's in it, the amount of plutonium in the pit, and some people are worried that the age of the plutonium. And in fact, this question of the original design was too close to the edge, and over time, the confidence in the reliability of 100% may drop. So for those weapons that were too close to the edge, there would be an incentive to make a new one, presumably. So the question is that a good idea? So the Jason group, which I think many of you know, is a group of, physicists and other scientists, high level, who are serve as consultants, really, to the government on a range of issues. And they looked at this question. They get all the they have security clearances. They get briefings from all of the relevant DOE and DOD folks. And they said in 95, after the U.S. stopped explosive testing, that greatest care in the form of self-discipline will be required to avoid system modifications, even if aimed at improvements, because they may compromise reliability. Okay. Oh. A few years later, the NAS issued a report. Again, the key to
NAS is the National Academy of Sciences.
Academy of Sciences, and CTBT is the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Also saying minimization of changes to existing warheads is key. Okay. Then, 10 years later, it has changed its tune a little bit. Okay? So it's saying reuse of nuclear components from other tested designs or nuclear component design changes that improve safety, security, and reliability could be credible and technically feasible approaches. Okay? And then they go on to say that you'd have to look at this on a case-by-case basis, and in some cases, we don't know enough to make this judgment. Okay, but it's quite different from what Jason and NAS said previously. So the question is the job here, is the goal to improve safety, security, and reliability, or is it to improve safety and security without degrading reliability? And Jason and others had basically said, don't mess with it with the goal of improving safety and security because you're going to degrade reliability. Okay? And so now with all of the computing power and the modeling, the weapons designers think they understand things better and would argue that yes, they could do that, but they could also improve not just safety, security, and reliability. So the other factor that comes in is, what people call use it or lose it. In other words, we have these designers. As I said, decades ago, there was an ongoing cycle of weapons design, weapons production, weapons deployment, weapons dismantlement. All factories were operating all the time. And there's a concern that if they're not, that the U.S. will lose the ability to do these. So the National Academy of Sciences, again, weighed in, and it said that maintaining nuclear weapons design skills is essential, in part because the U.S. might need to design and build weapons to meet evolving threats, which assumes that there could be an evolving threat that would make sense for the U.S. to build a new kind of weapon for, which I would challenge. But they also say, and these are much more, I think, defensible goals, is to understand what other countries are doing and to be sure that if there are problems that crop up with our existing weapons that we know what to do. But the first one is interesting. And in order to do that, it recommends a series of design competitions that include all of those things: designing, engineering, building, and non-nuclear testing. However, it should be done with a clear understanding that the prototype would not be deployed. Okay. Now, it is actually now U.S. policy. They have established a stockpile responsiveness program where, again, it is the factories need to keep operating. The U.S. needs to continually exercise all the capabilities to do these things. Now, it doesn't say that the U.S. needs to deploy, but that it needs to exercise the capabilities required to do these things. And that is, in fact, what's happening. So this is the schedule of the life extension program. and the replacement warhead program, and something called major alterations, which is kind of a mini life extension program. So we are right now, the U.S. is nearing the end of the dark blue is production, the light blue is research and development engineering. So we are nearing the end of the production of the W-76 warhead on the subs. They refurbished it. They did not build a new nuclear explosive package. They refurbished it. There is a little blue box below that, the W-76-2, which is the so-called low-yield variant of the warhead on the submarine that President Trump called for. And so because they were already opening up these warheads and refurbishing them, they were able to quickly do this as well, which basically it is a weapon without the secondary. And that will also in production very soon if it hasn't. So right now, as well, if we keep going down, the U.S. is gearing up to produce this new consolidated B-61 bomb, which also is a life extension program. It is really uses a nuclear explosive package from one of the existing variants of the B-61. Keep going down, the W-88, which is one of the warheads on the subs, also was a refurbishment. Keep going down, the W-80, which is a warhead that will be on the new air-launched cruise missile. Also a life extension program. They're going to take the old one and, update it. And now, we're at the W-78 replacement. So, the two warheads on the ICBMs are the W-87, which has insensitive high explosive, and the W-78 that does not. The plan a few years ago under Obama was that very complicated scheme, maybe not that complicated, but that this warhead, the W-78, would be replaced with one of an entirely new design, which they call the interoperable warhead, that would not just be on the land-based missiles, but would also be on the submarine-based missiles. They have walked back from that, I think for a variety of reasons, but now it is also just it's just a life extension. Well, it's not quite true. Let me undo that. They call it a replacement, but what they're replacing it with is essentially they're essentially using the nuclear explosive package of the W-87. So it's new to the W-78, but it's really not a whole new design. Keep going down. Now we are talking about a new design. Okay? So this is the interoperable Warhead 2, because what was 1 has now fallen off, or a ballistic missile Y. So still in the cards that they want to do something totally new. But they're not going to start doing the development for about another couple of years. And the same thing is true for the next one. Now, what's interesting that you should also notice, if you go back up and look at the B-61 row, you'll see that out in 35 that we have another light blue bar. And so basically this is going to be sort of a continuous cycle of, and at that point, it could be open to a new design. So the idea is, and this is what this diagram shows, is that there is this. All parts are busy at all times. What's also interesting about this is if you try to reduce the types of warheads, you get gaps. So let's say that we don't do the new air-launched cruise missile, which many people think we shouldn't, including Bill Perry. You have a gap. You have a big gap there between. You have like a 5-year gap when you're not producing anything. So the desire to keep continually exercise these options has a big effect on what the U.S. actually does with its arsenal, and that's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, so we've talked about the technical issues, about the improvements in safety and security, the question about reliability. Now let's talk about the political cost. So, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was extended indefinitely, and at that point, this is back in 1995. I think I have that right. No, must have been. Anyway.
Yeah, 95.
95, and that was something that the weapon states wanted very much. The options on the table were to have the treaty end, to extend it for another fixed period of time, another 25 years, say, or to extend it indefinitely, which is what happened. And part of the reason it happened is that the weapon states, really promised that they were going to do a comprehensive test ban treaty, which is one big thing that the non-nuclear weapon states wanted. And they wanted it for two reasons. Because they thought that it would restrict the ability of additional countries to develop nuclear weapons, and what's called horizontal proliferation, and that it would restrict the ability of the existing nuclear states to develop new types of weapons. In other words, vertical proliferation. And at that point, I think everybody believed that it would have those two effects. But now we're at a point, or the U.S. is at a point, where it thinks that even under a test ban, it actually can develop and deploy new types of weapons. So the U.S. is, we're not going to test, but if we still develop new nuclear weapons, it really undermines a key rationale for the comprehensive test ban treaty and a key desire on the part of the non-nuclear weapon states. And so this in turn could undermine the NPT, which is already a little wobbly because the nuclear weapon states are not holding up to their end of the bargain of moving towards disarmament. And as a consequence, there is a nuclear ban treaty that the non-nuclear weapon states negotiated, and basically saying this is not good enough and we're going to go a different route. So this is not hypothetical, this concern about proliferation treaty. Now, what about the resumption of testing? So the designers might well be very confident that they can do a new design without testing. But that's not the end of the story. There are other people who have a lot to say about whether the U.S. resumes testing, and they're politicians. And so the argument that we don't really know whether these things are going to work because we didn't test them can be quite compelling to people who are not technically trained, or even people who are technically trained and want to resume. There are people in the labs who really want to resume testing. So, this is ammunition, okay? And you can imagine that it would lead to calls for resume nuclear testing. So it's hard to believe that the labs could argue that these new designs actually give you greater confidence in warhead reliability. I think they might be able to argue it gives you the same, but it's not, and even that I'm sure is not a slam dunk, and there will be disagreements within the lab. So it's kind of ironic that these new designs are actually kind of counter to what the goals of the stockpile stewardship program is. So on balance, what do we have? Well, we have some pluses. We have these modest safety and security improvements vis-a-vis plutonium dispersal. It definitely increases, adding insensitive high explosive increases the safety for ICBM warheads. And so one already has it, the W-87. The W-78 is now going to be replaced with kind of a variant of the W-87. Okay. But that doesn't require a new design. It also increases security, but less so than for safety because of the weapons available on the market. And the benefits are smaller for the sub-warheads since the missiles are fueled with this conventional propellant. So it's definitely a net plus. On the minuses, we have this question about reliability, and I think there will always be a question about reliability if we go down this path. There are the political costs that I just talked about, and then there is this idea of keeping the factories running. And people will disagree on whether that's a good or bad. Clearly, Congress has decided it's a good thing. The labs believe it's a good thing. But if you are really trying to move to a world where you have fewer nuclear weapons and it's harder to undo that, then you don't want to have the factories. You don't want to have an agreement that says we're going to, limit our forces and then be able to withdraw from the agreement and rapidly build up. That's not a good thing. So it's a more complicated argument or discussion, but on balance, I would put it in the minus category. So that's where I end up. We should not be designing new kinds of nuclear weapons. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. If you, as I said before, if you have questions, either send it through chat or the Q&A feature. I wanted to start off by something you mentioned but didn't say anything about was the plutonium aging issue, and I wonder if you could just update us a little bit where that is.
Yeah. So plutonium does not exist in nature. It's produced in nuclear reactors. And the oldest plutonium is not that old for that reason. And plutonium is an alpha emitter, and so these large alpha particles are careening through the crystal structure, making holes. And so you might well expect that the properties of the plutonium would change as it aged. And so for a while, a long time actually, the assumption was that the lifetime of plutonium was 45 years. I'm not actually sure where that came. So there's a way to artificially age plutonium by doping it with replacing some of the 239 with 238. And then you get 17 years of aging per 1 year real time. And so the labs have been doing those experiments, and they had accumulated enough data to indicate, to take them out to 100 years of aging. Let's see, by, when was the last one? By 2010. And Jason was asked to look at the data, and come up with a conclusion. And they said, and the labs issued a statement to this effect that most pits have a minimum lifetime of 100 years. With one exception, it had a minimum lifetime of 85 years, but there were things that could be done. So it has been another many years. They have enough data now to go out to 200. Well, actually, what happened a few years ago is one of the people doing these experiments at, I think it was Lawrence Livermore, in their magazine, they had an article about this work, and they had found that it was the minimum lifetime was 150 years. It had gone on to 150. At which point, and they said, yeah, but that was plutonium, and that's different than pits. Anyway, I have had conversations with folks in NNSA who will say that the additional aging experiments they've done reveal that the original estimate of 100 years still holds. So there is now there's a study that Jason will undertake a study this coming summer. It's been requested by the Senate, and look at the data and see whether it's now out to 200 years. And this is actually really important because the U.S. Has a plan to build one or two new facilities to produce pits. And the goal is to be able to produce 80 pits a year, which is a lot. And part of that is to compensate for, to deal with aging, to build new pits because, you have to replace them. So if this comes out with a minimum of 200 years, it throws a wrench into those plans. And so I have to say the DOE is not keen on having this come out. And in fact, the legislation, requires that this happen, but in order for it to actually occur, DOE has to issue a kind of a work order, here's what we want. There's a document they have to produce in order for this to proceed, and they are not producing it. So that's where we stand in terms of plutonium aging.
Okay.
And I guess really the thing they have found through these artificial aging experiments is that plutonium has a self-annealing property. So yes, there are these holes, and then it fills them up.
Okay. Rob sent a text in. Doesn't look like he has a microphone. He said the NNSA invests in a program called the Primary Assessments Technology. He said it seems this could be part of assessing the reliability of weapons. Have you dug into this program far enough to understand the implication?
Primary Assessments Technology. I have not. I think no, I haven't. I am pretty sure that, as I said, when the U.S. it assesses reliability by taking the weapon apart, and it does so. It pulls weapons, out of the field, brings them back to the lab, opens them up. One of the pits they cut open. And to be sure to look at the plutonium, to, all those things. So this may be part of that with more sophisticated technology. I don't know. It's interesting.
Just following on with that, you had talked about the Stockpile Stewardship Program early on. Can you give us a little bit of an update of what its status is at this point?
Oh, well, it is ongoing. It is, the U.S. has invested a lot of money in new technology, like the National Ignition Facility, which they want to provide better data on how weapons work. It has not proved. It has not ignited. But that was quite expensive. And there are other, there are other facilities that, hold on a minute, sorry, that we have built. It's ongoing, and it has been extremely successful in that people understand more now about our nuclear weapons than they did while we were testing. So it's been
funding for that
tremendous
program
success.
Right. So, and funding for that program has been continuing at a reasonable level.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. This is not, yes. No, this is,
okay.
Yeah, and it will. I mean, everybody is pleased with this program.
All right.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody on the line? I have one final question that I wanted to ask you is you've talked here about goals of improving safety and security and maybe reliability.
Yeah.
And what you didn't really talk about was a goal of creating new capabilities. And to the extent that you think that either enters into it or has been a part of the debate, I wonder if you could just say something about that.
Well, it has not been anything. The question of new capabilities came up in the context of the revamped bomb, but not because of the explosive part of the bomb. It was about the reentry capability of the bomb. Not
This is the ICBM warhead, you're saying?
No, I'm talking about the bomb, and there's questions about
the B-61.
whether, yeah, it would be more accurate, and then hence, that is a change in capability of the overall bomb, not of the warhead. But it has not come up. Well, except this sort of abstract notion that we may need to do new things depending on what happens in the world. Right? That presumably is a new capability that they're referring to. So,
but people haven't specified what those things might be. That's
no. It's all very right. No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, it's coming up on 1 o'clock. I don't see any more questions. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Lisbeth, for talking about this.
Sure. Bye.